The sometimes writer, often director, and always the star of m.a.s.h, Hawkeye himself, Alda.
For 11 seasons, it was more than just a television show, it was a cultural event. It was a half-hour of laughter, heartbreak, and brutal honesty that pulled millions of us into the chaotic, compassionate world of the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. m.a.s.h wasn't just popular, it completely changed the face of television, using comedy as a way to explore the absurd and tragic realities of war. Its finale became the most-watched scripted broadcast in American history, a record that stood for decades. But behind the iconic canvas tents and the roaring laughter, a different kind of war was being waged. Tensions were simmering, egos were clashing, and creative battles were fought that were deliberately kept from the public. For years, the stories were just whispers, rumors in Hollywood. But now, at 89 years old, the man at the center of it all, Alda, is finally opening up. He's confirming the conflicts and revealing the truths that shaped one of TV's greatest shows. It turns out, what we saw on screen was only half the story. The other half is even more fascinating. When you think of the cast of m.a.s.h, you probably picture a family. A dysfunctional, wisecracking, but deeply bonded family of surgeons and nurses, all leaning on each other to get through the insanity of the Korean War. On screen, their chemistry was electric. It was a perfect blend of personalities that made the 4077th feel like a real place, a little pocket of sanity in the middle of all that madness. The friendship between Hawkeye Pierce and his tent mates, first Trapper John and later BJ Honeycutt, felt so genuine. The grudging respect between Hawkeye and Margaret, Hot Lips, Houlihan felt earned. We believed it all because it felt so true. For years, that was the story we were told, a cast that was just as close off-screen as they were on. They were a team, a well-oiled machine that produced groundbreaking TV, week after week, for 11 years. But the reality of any high-pressure, long-running show is always way more complicated. Just imagine the pressure, grueling shooting schedules, the constant demand for creative perfection, and a whole group of passionate, talented people, actors, writers, directors, all with their own strong ideas about what the show should be. It was a recipe for success, but it was also a powder keg of potential conflict. Behind the scenes, things weren't always so friendly. Creative disagreements were common and sometimes blew up into full-blown arguments. The very soul of the show was a battleground. Network executives were pushing for more jokes and a less political story, while Alda and other key creators were fighting for more realism, more depth, and more drama. This was the central tension of m.a.s.h. Was it a sitcom, or was it a powerful anti-war statement? That struggle didn't just happen in the writer's room, it played out on set, in the relationships between the cast, and in how the show changed over the years. As Alda's influence grew, so did the friction. He wasn't just the star, he became a writer, a director, and the show's creative conscience. But that kind of control came with a price. Today, looking back, Alda admits to the messiness, the conflicts, and the creative fights that were once carefully guarded secrets. These weren't just petty squabbles, they were passionate disagreements that came from a deep love for the show. The real story of what happened on the m.a.s.h set isn't about a perfect family, but something far more realistic and, in the end, more compelling, a story of a brilliant, complicated, and sometimes conflicted group of people who created a television legend. Every great creative revolution has a flashpoint, that moment where a new way of thinking smacks right into the old. On the m.a.s.h set, that collision came in the form of a tense standoff between its rising star, Alda, and a director from Hollywood's old school, Jackie Cooper. Cooper, a former child star himself, was a seasoned pro with a very traditional, by-the-book directing style. For him, the script was sacred. The words on the page were the law, and an actor's job was to say them as written, hit their marks, and leave the rest to him. But Alda came from a completely different school of thought. He'd trained in improvisation at Second City and believed that the best moments, the kind of lightning-in-a-bottle magic that makes a scene unforgettable, often happened in the spaces between the written lines. He saw the script as a roadmap, not a cage. For Alda, the goal wasn't just to recite dialogue, it was to make the characters feel alive, to allow for the spontaneous, messy, and surprising moments that make us human. He felt that if the actors had the freedom to explore, they could find deeper truths about their characters and the impossible situation they were in. This clash in philosophies created some serious tension on set. It wasn't just a simple disagreement, it was a battle for the creative soul of the show. People on the production reported heated moments and a power struggle over these competing visions. In his autobiography, Cooper painted Alda as a difficult and contradictory figure. He wrote, "On the surface, he was the man I had expected, very conscientious, very serious about his work, thoroughly professional. However, beneath that serene surface, things were different." Cooper accused Alda of being hostile and trying to inject his own liberal politics into the show, seeing Alda's push for creative input as a major overstep for an actor. One incident, in particular, became infamous. Cooper, trying to manage the cast, made a comment that was taken as a huge insult. He allegedly told the actors, if the producers had only wanted a funny person, they would have hired a Carl Reiner. But they wanted good actors, so they hired you. Cooper might have meant it as a weird compliment. But the cast, especially Alda, saw it as a knock against their comedic talent. Alda reportedly confronted him later, saying, "How dare you say the producers should have gotten a funny man like Carl Reiner in the show?" In his book, Cooper tried to paint Alda's reaction as irrational, but to many, it was clear Alda was simply standing up for his fellow actors. Alda has always insisted the conflict wasn't personal. He explained years later, it wasn't about disliking each other, it was about vision. "I cared deeply about making the show real." For him, this wasn't about ego, it was about his vision for m.a.s.h. He believed the show's power was in its authenticity, and he was willing to fight for it. The show's writers have pretty much backed Alda's side of the story. Ken Levine, a writer for the series, said that the diva behavior Cooper described just wasn't there. Levine noted that while Cooper and the cast didn't get along, Cooper was never asked back to direct, while the show's creators, Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds, had nothing but effusive praise for Alan and the cast. Levine described Alda as the quintessential team player, who was always respectful, even when he helped with rewrites. In the end, Alda's vision won. As the series went on, his influence grew, and the show evolved under his guidance. The battle with Jackie Cooper was just the first of many fights Alda would have for the soul of m.a.s.h, cementing his role not just as its star, but as its fiercest protector. The perfect image of the m.a.s.h cast as one big happy family was shattered at the end of Season 3. That's when two of the show's main pillars, McLean Stevenson, who played the lovable Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake, and Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John McIntyre, both left. Their exits weren't just casting changes. They were earthquakes that shook the show to its core and exposed the frustrations that had been building behind the scenes. McLean Stevenson's departure was fueled by a classic Hollywood dream: he wanted to be the star. He was beloved as the bumbling, good-hearted Henry Blake, but he was tired of being just one part of a big ensemble. He saw Alan Alda's Hawkeye becoming a phenomenon and felt his own role was being pushed to the side. Loretta Swit later said that Stevenson wanted to be #1 and knew it wouldn't happen on m.a.s.h. He was getting offers to headline his own shows, and the chance at top billing was just too tempting. He thought America loved McLean Stevenson, but he was about to learn a tough lesson. They loved Henry Blake. The writers gave him one of the most shocking and unforgettable exits in TV history. In the episode Abyssinia, Henry Blake gets his discharge and heads home. Just moments later, radar walks into the operating room and announces that Blake's plane was shot down over the Sea of Japan, and there were no survivors. The decision to kill the character was kept a secret from most of the cast until the last second to get their raw, genuine reactions on camera. It was a gut punch to the audience and a clear sign that m.a.s.h was willing to break all the rules of television comedy. For Stevenson, it was also a final goodbye, slamming the door on any chance of ever coming back. Wayne Rogers's exit was quieter but came from a similar place of creative frustration. When he first signed on, he thought m.a.s.h would be a true two-man show, with Hawkeye and Trapper as equal partners, just like in the movie. But as the show went on, it became obvious that Hawkeye was the star. More and more storylines revolved around Alda's character, and Trapper was slowly becoming a sidekick. This wasn't about any personal issues with Alda. Rogers always said he loved working with him, but he just couldn't shake the feeling that he was being sidelined. He knew that if he stayed, that feeling would only get worse. The way he left was surprisingly simple. It turned out he had never actually signed a formal contract. He'd raised some concerns about a few clauses, and in a shocking oversight, the producers just never followed up. This gave him the freedom to walk away at the end of Season 3 without any legal battle. His character just disappeared between seasons, with a quick line in the Season 4 premiere explaining he'd been discharged. The quiet exit was a huge contrast to Henry Blake's dramatic death, but it said a lot about the changing power dynamics on set. These departures had a huge impact. They cemented Alan Alda's position as the undisputed center of the m.a.s.h universe. The show had survived losing two major characters, which proved its strength but also created a new identity. The era of the true ensemble was over. The Alan Alda years had officially begun. When Mike Farrell joined the cast in Season 4 as B.J. Honeycutt, he had a pretty tough job ahead of him. He had to fill the space left by Wayne Rogers, stepping into one of the most beloved bromance on television. The chemistry between Hawkeye and Trapper was a huge part of the show's early success, and trying to recreate that seemed almost impossible. But what happened next wasn't a simple replacement. It was the start of a new, more complicated, and just as compelling partnership, both on-screen and off. The relationship between Alan Alda and Mike Farrell was built on deep mutual respect, but it was also charged with a friendly, competitive energy. They were both incredibly dedicated to their work and deeply invested in their characters. This shared passion often led to a friendly rivalry that pushed both of them to be better. Off-screen, this competition was often playful. They'd challenge each other to see who could learn to do a handstand first. Farrell, a former Marine, would even try to trip Alda for fun as they walked to the set. These weren't mean-spirited pranks, but the kind of playful jabs that happen between two pros who are comfortable enough to constantly push each other. But sometimes, that competitive spirit spilled over into more serious creative disagreements. Both Alda and Farrell were known to get involved in the writing, fighting for their characters and making sure the emotional moments felt real. Farrell has been open about Alda's intense focus and high standards, admitting that his co-star's clear vision could sometimes be intimidating. Their clashes often came from their different acting styles. Alda, with his improv background, often pushed for more spontaneity, while Farrell was focused on a more subtle, grounded, and emotionally authentic style. One of their most famous disagreements happened during the Season 7 episode, Preventative Medicine. The plot involved a reckless commander who was putting his men in danger, and the surgeons debated whether it was ethical to perform an unnecessary surgery on him to get him sent home. At the table read, Mike Farrell strongly objected, arguing that his character, B.J. Honeycutt, would never cross that ethical line. Alan Alda disagreed, and the two had a lively, half-hour debate right there about their characters' morals. According to writer Ken Levine, who was there, the debate was completely professional. No one raised their voice, and the argument stayed focused on the script. But it was a perfect example of the creative friction that could happen. In the end, the writers decided Farrell had a point, and they rewrote the script to include the ethical argument between Hawkeye and B.J. Levine noted that Alda, even though he disagreed, joined the rewrite session and was super positive and excited about the new direction. He recognized that the conflict gave the episode a powerful new dynamic. This incident, which is sometimes wrongly described as a major fight, was actually proof of how strong their professional relationship was. It showed that even when they disagreed, their main goal was always to make the show better. Their friendship was complex. It wasn't the easy, wisecracking bond of Hawkeye and Trapper, but a deeper, more mature connection forged in the heat of intense creative work. They were two different men with different methods, but they shared a powerful commitment to the show's core message. Their dynamic, full of both friction and affection, mirrored the very essence of m.a.s.h itself, a delicate balance between laughter and seriousness, chaos and control. The stories from the m.a.s.h set are just as layered and compelling as the show itself. Each character, each conflict, and each friendship played a part in its iconic legacy. Which m.a.s.h character made the biggest impression on you, and why? Share your favorite moments and characters in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories about your favorite shows. As m.a.s.h moved into its middle and later seasons, a quiet but massive transformation was happening behind the scenes. Alda was no longer just the face of the show, he was becoming its heart, its brain, and its conscience. When original creators like head writer Larry Gelbart left, a creative vacuum opened up, and Alda, with his passion and deep understanding of the characters, stepped right in. This evolution from actor to de facto showrunner, what you could call the Alda effect, was probably the single most important factor in shaping the show's legacy, turning it from a hit sitcom into a cultural landmark. Alda's involvement started slowly. He wrote his first episode in Season 1 and directed his first in Season 2. By Season 6, he was officially a creative consultant, a title that didn't even begin to cover how much influence he had. He ended up writing 19 episodes and directing 32, including the epic series finale, Goodbye, Farewell and Amen. He's the only person in history to win Emmy Awards for acting, writing, and directing for the same series, a stunning testament to his talent and his vital role in the show's success. Under his leadership, m.a.s.h went through a major tonal shift. The comedy years of Gelbart and Gene Reynolds gave way to the more dramatic years of Alda. While the show never lost its sense of humor, Alda pushed it into deeper, more challenging territory. Having served in the Army Reserve himself, he was committed to showing the emotional weight of war with unflinching honesty. He championed storylines that moved beyond the early season antics to openly tackle complex political and social issues. The show started to explore the psychological trauma of the surgeons, the moral compromises they faced every day, and the profound human cost of conflict. Episodes written and directed by Alda often experimented with the sitcom format in ways that were totally unheard of at the time. One incredible episode he wrote, Dreams, dove into the nightmares of the main characters, giving a surreal and haunting look at their subconscious fears. It was a dark, intense episode that definitely turned off some viewers who just wanted a comedy, but Alda felt he had a deal with the audience. He'd take them on an unconventional ride one week, with the promise of more familiar laughs the next. This willingness to take risks, to choose emotional truth over easy punchlines, became Alda's signature, but this level of creative control wasn't always smooth sailing. As Hawkeye became the show's undeniable center, some cast members felt the focus had shifted too much toward him. The departures of Wayne Rogers and McLean Stevenson were early signs of this tension. Later, even Larry Linville, who played the constantly tormented Frank Burns, reportedly felt creatively stuck as the show's tone grew more serious, leaving less room for his style of broad comedy. Alda had a very clear vision for the show, and not everyone always fit into it. His demand for authenticity also led to a long-running battle over the laugh track. Alda and the producers hated the canned laughter, feeling it cheapened the show's dramatic moments and betrayed its message. They fought a long and bitter war with the network over it. The compromise they finally reached was to have the laughter turned down and completely removed during scenes in the operating room. It was a small victory, but a huge one, as it protected the most sacred and serious space in the show. The Alda effect was transformative. It ensured m.a.s.h would be remembered not just as a funny show, but as an important one. His growing control might have caused some tension and imbalance on set, but it was also the driving force that pushed the show to become something truly groundbreaking. He wasn't just playing Hawkeye Pierce. In many ways, he was Hawkeye Pierce, the show's moral compass, its sharpest wit, and its most passionate voice for humanity in the face of madness. Beyond the big, documented conflicts, the set of m.a.s.h was a world filled with its own unique quirks, secrets, and untold stories, little moments that show the dedication, the humor, and the deep emotional reality of making the show. These weren't headline-grabbing dramas, but smaller, more personal details that paint a much richer picture of life at the 4077th. One of the biggest myths about the show is that it was full of improvisation, which seems like a given with Alda's background. The truth? It was the exact opposite. Especially in the early years, the scripts were treated like gospel. Head writer Larry Gelbart had a strict, no ad-libbing rule. If an actor had a problem with a line, they couldn't just change it, they had to call Gelbart, who would sometimes ride his bike over to the set to personally rewrite the scene. Alda remembered a time when he and Wayne Rogers delivered a line that turned out to be a typo. When Gelbart saw the footage, he demanded to know why they'd said it. Alda's defense was simple: it was in the script. This tight control just shows how much craftsmanship went into the show's legendary dialogue. Life on set had its share of weird and tough moments. The cast often had to act like they were sweating in the Korean summer heat while they were actually filming on a chilly California ranch. Alda recalled one scene where it was so cold his teeth started chattering in the middle of a line. The director just waved it off, said it looked like he was emotionally rattled, and that take made it into the show. In the operating room, they had some clever tricks. With no medical advisor on set in the early days, the actors relied on the writer's research. Alda, tasked with performing fake complex surgeries, would often have a copy of the script laid out on the operating table, hidden from the camera, so he could read his lines while looking like he was focused on a patient. But maybe the most powerful secrets were the ones designed to pull real, raw emotion from the cast. The decision to kill off Colonel Blake is the most famous example. The last page of that script, the one revealing his death, was kept from the actors until right before filming. The shock, grief, and tears you see on screen from Gary Berghoff and the others? That's all completely real. It was an emotionally draining trick, but it shows how committed the producers were to capturing authentic human reactions to the tragedy of war. This emotional truth ran deep. Loretta Swit remembered a moment after filming a really intense monologue where she just broke down crying, not as her character, Margaret, but as herself. The crew went silent, and Alda simply came over and hugged her without saying a word. It was a moment of deep connection, born from the shared weight of the story. Similarly, when Gary Berghoff filmed his final scene as Radar, the tears were real. The entire cast and crew were crying, knowing they were saying goodbye not just to a character, but to a member of their family. Mike Farrell reportedly couldn't get through his goodbye speech without choking up. There were lighter moments of connection, too. William Christopher's son shared a story that after a real-life tragedy struck a crew member's family, his father, who played Father Mulcahy, led an actual prayer circle on set. It wasn't for the cameras, it was a genuine moment of spiritual support that brought everyone together. These stories show that for all the fights and the pressure, the bonds formed on that set were real and powerful. The line between fiction and reality often blurred, creating a shared experience that gave the show a soul no script could ever write. Decades after the last, record-breaking episode of m.a.s.h aired, the dust has finally settled. The true story of how it was made is much clearer now. That old image of a perfectly happy set has been replaced by something far more nuanced and real, a picture of intense collaboration, passionate arguments, and profound personal bonds. And at the center of it all is Alda, now 89, looking back on the experience that defined his career and changed television forever. His recent honesty confirms what many of us long suspected: making m.a.s.h was a messy, complicated, and often difficult process. There were battles with directors like Jackie Cooper over the show's creative path. There were the painful goodbyes to beloved cast members like McLean Stevenson and Wayne Rogers, departures driven by the massive pull of Alda's own rising star. There were the friendly but fierce rivalries, like the one with Mike Farrell, that pushed the actors to be even better. And there was Alda's own transformation into the show's creative leader, a move that steered m.a.s.h toward greatness but also created friction within the cast at S.O. Was Alda difficult, as some have suggested? To call him that is to miss the point completely. His fights weren't about ego, they came from a deep, unwavering commitment to making something great. He fought for the show's soul, for its right to be more than a sitcom, for its duty to tell the truth about war, and for its potential to be a powerful piece of art. The battles he fought, against the network, against creative limits, and sometimes against his own colleagues, were ultimately battles for the show. The legacy of m.a.s.h is proof that great art is rarely born from everyone agreeing. It's forged in the fire of debate, disagreement, and different visions. The tension between comedy and drama, between following the script and improvising, and between what sells and what's true is exactly what gave the show its unique power and why it still means so much today. And despite all the conflicts, the bonds that were formed in that pressure cooker remain. Alda has spoken fondly of the sense of family among the cast and the genuine affection that has lasted for decades. The disagreements never got in the way of their shared mission. The story of what really happened on the m.a.s.h set isn't a tale of heroes and villains. It's a human story about a group of brilliant, passionate, and flawed people who came together to create something extraordinary. And in finally confirming the truth of those struggles, Alda has given us an even deeper appreciation for the messy, beautiful, and unforgettable magic of the 4077th.